What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Magnetic Operator.
The MO.
The MO.
The MO.
What's your MO? So, Sam, today we're going to dive into something. Couple things that I wanted to pull into this episode, but I'm going to first start off with some news. So, Sam is my right-hand man here.
Hello.
And with that, I recently transitioned your role slightly as to COO, which today we're going to have a conversation about how to put your operations as a commercial cleaning company on autopilot. So we're going to play into some of those changes, even why you and I had those discussions and changes on why that was critical for even us as a software company, but especially why that move is so critical for many of our customers. There's this gap. We get a lot of CEOs usually coming in from a prospect standpoint, trying to do something that is very much operationally, right? I find that fascinating because that's almost like a leading indicator that they haven't let go yet.
Boy, that's an understatement.
Right? You know, I had this thought earlier and I said, something you and I have been working constantly is like, hey, who do we serve to? Who's the best market? Every company has to go through that, right? They have to figure out like their best ICP clarity, what you're trying to achieve. And I kind of had this thought of, you know, it's probably considered a red flag if you're coming in as the CEO. Usually that means you're probably a little bit too small to work with us, right? We work, and our tool specifically is more optimized in some large scale operations. But I want to bring this type of conversation to our audience today about what it means to take operations and to put it on autopilot. Now, to give preface to this, I'm not talking about like the autopilot story where it's the actual pilot that does nothing.
You mean you're in the cockpit, you hit a button, and then you get to put your hands back and say...
So I'll illustrate it this way. I'm talking about how to create operational autopilot, not to be the pilot that just pushes the button. You as the CEO eventually get to push the button. You're the pilot of your aircraft. Right. But you need to find someone that can engineer your plane, your aircraft, in a way that allows it to run on autopilot so that you can take a bathroom break compared to the F-14 that flies by. Did you ever hear that story? I don't know. I doubt it was ever a real story, but on social media it was like, I can't picture this in the sky because planes don't fly this close to each other. But F-14s would, accompanying, you know, Air Force One or something. But like the pilot pulls up next to Air Force One.
Right.
And he's just kind of like dogging him, like, dude, look what I can do, like doing flips in the sky and whatever.
Tom Cruise did it in the movie.
Right. And the airline pilot or Air Force One pilot goes something like this. And he says, oh, well, that's pretty cool that you can do all that. And then he goes radio silent. And then, like, the pilot gets back. He's like, where'd you go? Like, you just didn't answer me? He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I got up, stretched my legs, went to the bathroom. You know, kind of the luxuries of putting a plane on autopilot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I think of that instance of, like, what does it mean to put your aircraft, your business, on autopilot? And I don't mean pressing the button. That's later on. It's how do you build your aircraft to run on autopilot? So there's systems in place in an aircraft that have to be built in order for that functionality to work. And that's what I want to discuss today. Now, specifically with your transition to a COO role, from your perspective, what is it about operations as a whole that a commercial cleaning company could learn from about your realization in our discussion of like, hey, this is why we need someone permanent in this role?
Well, the first thing I want to actually acknowledge is how we even got to the conversation of switching our priority and what you and I, how we were functioning in our own organization. We were on a golf course. And
so we got to go golfing more.
We need to go golfing more. That's the main point. But we're on a golf course. And because we had the time to think and not
space.
Right. We weren't go. We weren't always just doing, right?
I struggle with that.
I think most operators do. Most owners or CEOs of businesses struggle with that. That is a true challenge. And it's because oftentimes as leaders, we feel like we have to be doing something to feel productive, to feel like we are adding value, when really The leader's true role is to give themselves time and space to think, to come up with new answers, to come up with the things that will help the business succeed in a much better way than it is now, right?
Yeah.
But it's not always a grand change, like moving someone into a COO role like we're going to do or are doing. It can be small. But I think it's important to preface even that type of decision, or when you start talking about the need for enhancing operations, you first have to give yourself time every week as a leader to think about, truly understand what's happening in the business and how can we improve it.
Yeah.
So then to answer your question, when it comes to the operation of a cleaning business and the need for someone to own the day-to-day operations, you always hear the phrase, don't work in the business, work on the business. And I've always struggled to try to figure out what that truly means. And I'd love your take on it from your point of view, what that means. But the reason it's hard to think about is because you think, okay, I got to be doing something to be adding value. But ultimately, a person who's put into a COO role or even a director role and even a management role, you are given a certain set of tasks to accomplish, and then your job is to make that task more doable through efficient means, processes, operations, flows, instruction, right? Whatever it is that makes that thing happen in execution, it has to be given to those individuals to then delegate to the rest of the team, because you hire people to do a job. So if you're doing their job, then I would argue that you're not delegating appropriately. You're not operating functionally. So what are your thoughts on some of those things?
One of the things that stood out, as you said, that like working on the business versus in the business, let's start there. That is a statement that is role centric. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is one of those roles belongs to the CEO. When you are tasked with working on the business, you're talking about long-term goals, the longevity of the business, where is it going, who's the ultimate market you're going to serve, how you're going to show up against competition, how is the face of the company supposed to look, what kind of brand do you want to be known for?
Position, message, right, identity.
And amongst all of that, to implement all of those things is someone who works in the business. So my job as a CEO is to set the tone, set the pace, set the expectations. And I'd say, like, let's first dive into that, is to clearly define roles and responsibilities. That's kind of how you're going to be able to segment and separate the two. Now, we, even in our own conundrum of operating Otuvy, have some gaps here that we don't need to fill. We just need to realign, because the gaps that we've created are getting in our own way. So a part of that was coming to a moment of clarity, sure, out on a golf course.
It was a lovely day.
Once a year is when it happens.
I know we do. Once a year, preparing for our attorneys tournament.
I would love to play golf way more. But anyways, what it did do is allow us to, how long was a round of golf? 5 hours?
It was 4 or 5 hours.
4 or 5 hours. Like, that's a long time just to BS around, right? In conversation. Now, when you aren't following a specific agenda, what things start to come around when you get the right people in a room or in an area on a course talking is we're able to go deeper than most conversations in meetings and in our smaller interactions, because time literally just kind of cuts us off. And so that was kind of the first interesting thing, is we got really deep into this clearly defined roles and responsibilities and what's missing. And I would label that as like number one. If you as a commercial cleaning company are trying to get to that next level, to scale, do you have clearly defined roles and responsibilities outlined somewhere? And I'm about to sneeze.
Bless you.
It went away.
Oh, it took away. You said watermelon in your head, didn't you?
Is that how it works?
I think you say watermelon or pineapple.
Pineapple.
But to that point, the role clarity has been one of the most critical pieces that I have found to lead to greater success in any management or director or VP or C-suite role I've been in.
Or even as an individual contributor.
Even as an individual contributor, right? I need to know what I need to own. And when I don't know what I need to own, then it feels chaotic.
Yeah.
It feels like, oh, I don't know how to do this job, right? And so the role clarity, it only gets, the need to know that only heightens when you get higher up in the business, because those individuals have to know, why do I have this person employed and sitting in this seat?
Yeah.
What does that person need to help me do to deliver what our customers are asking us to do on the frontline level, right? And so when it pertains to the commercial cleaning business, you have to realize that, yeah, if you have a COO or a VP of ops or someone that's at the head of those day-to-day operations, that individual's job is to make sure that everything else is functioning.
Yeah.
So the CEO feels confident that the business is running in a way that is conducive to what is being shared as, hey, this is what we offer. This is the brand. This is the identity. This is our culture. This is who we want to be for you as a partner. So setting the vision as a CEO, but letting even that delegation of that work through role clarity is, I agree, step number one, which actually leads to what we believe is step number two, starting with delegation, right? You have to delegate.
And delegation, it's such a taboo word that is used in so many different levels. Delegation, the idea of delegation can be misconstrued as micromanagement, right? Delegation in the sense of like, oh, I'm telling you to do this. I'm going to tell you to do this. Oh, look, I'm delegating, right? True delegation is the outcome that needs to be achieved, and I expect this outcome to be hit. And you also can't leave it at that level. So delegation would come from, hey, this is the outcome, and here are some ways that I think we can achieve the outcome. Other things of you might be involved in the day-to-day on the onset to help the knowledge transfer or the expectations being set. But a good, going back to our theme of the magnetic operator, a magnetic operator is addicted to taking those learnings and then making them scalable. So it becomes easier to delegate because the systems and processes are set up that says, hey, when so-and-so is saying this, this is what it means. When I'm given this, this is how it gets inserted into my workflow. And even I've had my own struggles with that. But like the times where it's worked the best is when you delegate it into a system. You don't just delegate it by words.
I like that. I'm reading 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. And he outlined what many have outlined before, where you're using the matrix where it's important, urgent and important, urgent and...
urgent, non-important, and then non-urgent, non-important.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So getting rid of that bottom quadrant, avoiding the only urgent quadrant, right? But you're doing the important things. So when you think about even a CEO or a COO leadership, we should be living in that important realm. And when it comes to the important and the urgent, you work on delegating that. And to that point, sometimes we think everything is urgent. And so an evaluation of what should be delegated and then actually in small chunks delegating those things to the individuals that it makes the most sense to do, I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, going to the quadrant that he shared initially there was, if I as a CEO don't spend enough time in the non-urgent, important quadrant, I mean, it's not urgent, but it is important. Usually it's things that never get done because it's not urgent. But like every single role has a level of the urgent and important. And then the non-important but still urgent. Our time gets consumed on that side of things.
Yeah.
And then we don't make time for the important, non-urgent things. I think a CEO's time is one of the most important aspects to understand and to get living in that quadrant majority of the time. Doesn't mean all the time, but the majority of the time. And so a part of that is, for me, going into the next step is once you delegate, part of delegate, maybe almost consider this a sub-step of delegation, is setting clear expectations and metrics of what you just delegated is supposed to come back and deliver to you, right? As a leader. And it goes all the way down, every single level. It gets simpler in its delegation and understanding all the way down to the front line. But giving your cleaners a task list of what they need to own for the day is the ultimate simplest form of delegation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You kind of pointed out this a second ago, and it kind of just stuck with me. It was just like, it actually gets more important the higher up you move in the ladder to have that level of clarity. Often we don't have a detailed task list of what, there's like this sense of it's more important at a higher level to be even more clear, but coming with that is like this level of autonomy that comes up with each level, that you are supposed to be in your own creative element, and you no longer get the exact task list. Now you just get, here's the expected outcome and here's the metrics of how I'm going to measure that. Right. And so for a commercial cleaning company who's trying to create this magnetic operation that just comes full circle and people desire to be in, well, you got to ask yourself those questions. Are those pieces in place? Are the expectations there? And how are you going to measure or keep track of along the way that expectations are being hit?
One of the hardest things I feel like when it comes to leading an operation, whether it's cleaning business or not, is knowing what to measure, the priority of what to measure. Because how many times have we gone into leadership meeting and we go through team metrics and we're off track, or we're on track, but we're not seeing the end result, which might be revenue based or
Sure.
more customers or more, how do you know what to measure in an operation that will actually lead to success? And you may not have a full answer because it's always changing, I think, as a business evolves. So just curious your thoughts. Where do you begin and how do you prioritize what to measure and what matters most?
In a commercial cleaning company, I think there are a set of things that give a clear measurement of where your revenue comes from, and it's your relationship with the customer. Right? No matter how big, no matter how small, it's, are you able to put a measurable number behind how you think the relationship is going with the customer? Now, there's like super, super simple ways to do this when you're first starting out, right? More of a model in a smaller org might be like, hey, we're going to assign 100 points to an account, 20 points. You can gain up to 20 points by this metric. Do they have a monthly review call? Okay, that's worth 10 points, right? So you can build your own system and actually create it as a number. Hey, this account's sitting at a 75 out of 100 according to our own numbers, right? That's one level.
Customer health score
right.
index.
Customer health score, right? That's a level of operationally how your thing's set up. But like to a commercial cleaning business, obviously I'm a little biased, but I believe service quality is the number one leading indicator of you being able to retain clients and win more business, because that is your product. How good is your product? Well, if you aren't measuring it, you will never know, right? So I believe that in order for operations to be performing at this elite level, you've got to create a feedback loop that is contextual to go off of.
Mm-hmm.
Because like we've done this on former episodes before, like terrible feedback, right? Or like you aren't going to get good feedback out of it, but could you base feedback off of actual data and input? Well, if your product, the service for a commercial cleaning company is doing X, Y, and Z, but you aren't going back and measuring how well X, Y, and Z was delivered, having proof that it was done, right? You're missing opportunities for feedback loops to actually say if it was good, bad, needs improvement, right? If you're just operating for the sake of operating, it's like putting on a blindfold in, what was that Netflix thing called? Bird Box?
Bird Box. I never saw it.
Neither did I, but like
Sandra Bullock wore a blindfold.
Right, the blindfold. Anyways, it was like shortly after A Quiet Place came out.
What you just said, though, that actually made me think. I think oftentimes when we talk about commercial cleaning businesses and the need for feedback, it's usually, hey, gain feedback from your customers so you can see where you can improve. But how often do we not seek feedback from our own teams internally about our own operations and our processes, right? As a COO or a director who has to create processes and have other people internally do that job, if you give it to them and say, go do it, and then you just let it run, there most likely will be road bumps and things that stand in the way of success. But because oftentimes we don't put that feedback loop in place, and I'm guilty of this. If you don't put a feedback loop in place on your own process that you've developed to delegate and get tasks done, then you don't know if it's actually doing what goal you've set for it to actually accomplish.
Yeah, a senior leader of ops or a COO has two sides of the coin when it comes to operations,
right?
Internal and external operations.
Yeah.
Your operations, how it affects customers and the experience there, and versus internally. And just because it's something I believe and say all the time doesn't mean we're perfectly executing it, but I believe a company's greatest asset is its processes.
Yeah, that's what led to the change.
I said, Sam, our greatest asset as an organization, the way we're going to scale and achieve the audacious goals that we have, is by putting more emphasis into the systems, processes, and playbooks that we operate out of as an organization. As a commercial cleaning company, you rise and fall to the level of your systems.
Yeah.
People create systems. That's where people are in charge of building systems. But I believe that once those systems are in place, that naturally moves you to kind of that next phase, which is this fifth step after you've received feedback, which is now focus on strengths and the development of how things are operating. Because now you have insight, now you have data, now you see what's working, now you see what's not. Now you go and evolve it, change it. Some people don't like that. They probably don't belong in your organization if people aren't liking the idea of change. Yeah. But that is a catalyst for change, is focus on strengths and development once the systems and processes are in place that says, hey, you know what, this needs an improvement.
Yeah, sometimes when we create a process, we create it, we say, go do it, and then let me know how it goes. There's very little training.
Yeah.
You think about some organizations that probably have thousands of employees.
Yeah.
They have to train their people. And sometimes they go through 6-8 week trainings. And if that's what it takes to make sure that something happens effectively every single time that directly affects the bottom line of your business, why wouldn't you give that time? Right. Yeah. But oftentimes we think, oh, well, this team's already been doing it for, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. So I'm not going to give them 6 weeks of training. I'm just going to create the process and let them figure it out. I've learned just in my time as an operator that you can't just expect people to pick it up and run with it and be successful with it. If you want your people to succeed, you have to give them the training and the coaching along with the process to make them successful in that effort.
Sometimes we're of the belief as leaders that, hey, they seem to have the skill set, kind of like I do, to go figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's a very real rarity amongst people. And even if someone has the talent to go figure it out, you can't take a figure-outer person and plug him into a bunch of people that don't know how to figure out things.
Yeah. Because then if you're figuring it out, you're going to expect the people below you, again, this delegation process.
Yep.
You're going to delegate the figuring out at pieces because you didn't take the time to figure it all out.
Believing that everyone can go just figure it out.
Right.
Like I've been there. You've been there. Right. When commercial cleaning operations are full of just go figure it out culture, that's when you start spinning your wheel in the mud.
I'm always thinking about what I read in Good to Great, where you have to put the right people in the right place on the right seat in the bus. And as you won't know where to place people in their greatest strength unless you train and coach them along with the process. So I do believe that the strength and the development of individuals happens when you're implementing process and you make part of that implementation a training. Someone has to own that piece. Sometimes that's hard because you don't want somebody to dedicate hours on end to prepare a training to then, because who knows, they might not even listen, right? That's a challenge. Boy, that is a challenge. You bring people into a room, you train them, and then they didn't absorb any of it, but you spent 20 hours preparing for that meeting.
Yeah.
Someone wasted time there, and it's usually because the value wasn't pitched on from a leadership level as to why the change is necessary.
Or even just having a future plan. I've learned in all of my years that you can never just train on something once or twice or 3 times, right? Which is why your operations as a commercial cleaning company have to be shored up to the point where it is a constant. It's really hard. You feel like you're spinning your wheels. Sometimes, like after trying to make enhancements and change and be like, hey, we're going to take our operations to this elite level as an organization. Here's all of the why and here's what it is. Well, here's what happens. This is the scenario, right? We've done this. We've experienced this ourselves. We've literally spent months in this process, figuring it out, trying to figure out how to implement it. And we've worked out all the kinks. We've thought, maybe not all of them, but we've been so ingrained into this process as leaders, involved in a process. By the time it actually gets to the front line, we're exhausted. We've vetted this out. Here's what we're going to go do.
Now go do it. Yeah.
Because we're kind of done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, well, of course it makes sense to us. And of course it's absorbed. We created it, but we also had months to do it.
Yeah.
In constant conversation. And the problem is, if you're operating that way as a commercial cleaning company, here's a red flag. If this is happening where you're like, it made perfect sound sense and science to us of how employees should be operating, and yet they still don't grasp it. Well, how long did it take for you to grasp it, to build out the process? Oh, we spent 3 months building out this program and initiative and weekly meetings with that. All right. Weekly meetings, divide that 3 months. Okay, so you had 12 strategic meetings about all of the nuances and processes, and you did one, maybe you did 2 trainings on this with your staff on how it's supposed to work, but you got 12, right? Like, I've been there.
That's someone who has more knowledge, right? If you're higher up in the company, it usually is because you've been around long enough to know.
At that point, they need more than the 12 you had.
Yeah, exactly.
There's this sense of level of training and constantly being in it. That's part of the day-to-day is you won't get out of the day-to-day unless you spend day-to-day in ensuring that it's grasped, that it's in the right places, and that you have internal feedback on how it's operating, external feedback on how it's operating, how it's being received, which comes to kind of the final point, which that initiative that has to take place to ensure that there's strengths in everyone and that people are in the right seat and that it's being received well, is that you don't micromanage. And that's probably the hardest part. It's so easy to fall into that category of like, I got to make sure the details get implemented. And I got to make sure that because we've invested so much time into building out a process, right? We've had organizations that do tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue in a single year. And they come to us and they look at a process, and on the onset, they are so overwhelmed with just how to start breaking down the strategic initiative to go roll it out at 6,000 sites.
I mean, that is a big project.
It is. But the problem is they might spend 6 months in the preparation of that rollout, and then there's 2, maybe 3 touch points of the entire frontline staff. This is how it's supposed to get implemented. This is how it's going to streamline our operations. This is how we're all going to level up.
Going back to setting that vivid vision and making sure that the buy-in is happening, at least with key players that can then be your advocate in that flow. I think that's why it's so critical to get your managers and, you know, those below that are working with those on the front line, because you want to give them the autonomy to move through that stuff, right?
Yeah.
You want to say, hey, I'm going to give you this, you own it, but I got to give you the vision and the clarity so that when you go pitch it, it's the same thing. That's usually the game of telephone, right? My kids and I play it at dinner time. It doesn't ever end up the same phrase because it went through 6 people before it got to that person. And so how do you avoid the game of telephone with your management team to ensure that the vision and what you're trying to accomplish is set so that things are appropriately completed?
So I think there is a level of telephone practice that goes into play. Like, you can't expect yourself to roll out a new operational framework and initiative and get it right. We've been part of many discussions where like, all right, I want to come roll this out. I have 600 sites that I want to get up and running in the next 30 days. And I'm like, where's the test period? Right? Where's the pilot to ensure that what you think is enough actually is enough? Right? Rule of thumb. Whatever you think it takes, times it by 3. And if you're a developer telling the CEO, whatever you think it takes, times it by 10. Right?
All right, just keep that in mind when I start building stuff out, dude, okay? Because I'm going to go back to this episode right here. You just said.
But I think that's an appropriate expectation is whatever you think, just always know that it's going to be longer. because the craft of true greatness takes time to develop. There's a new book that comes out at the end of this month, Software as a Science, by the SaaS Academy group, Dan Martell, Matt Verlack, Johnny Page,
Marcel Petitbos.
Yeah, all 4 authors. They talked about the beginning 2 years ago when they wrote the book, and relatively fast, the book was ready to go. So they thought, like, it had all the core concepts in it, and it was just like, we could have just put it out there.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have been great. You and I were working on a project over the last couple of days. The initial thing, it would have been okay, but was it great? So when you're trying to implement something operationally, it's my sights aren't set on how do we get to an okay level.
Yeah.
It's how do we get to an elite level. You might have to start with an okay level, but you can't ever leave it there. Otherwise, it becomes a linchpin later on in your growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Good discussion.
Yeah, dude. We should write a book. Call it
The Magnetic Operator.
Nah, dude. Yeah, we should. Yeah, you're right.
Well, now I'm curious. What do you want to write a book on? Hockey?
No. I think magnetic operator is it, because what we ultimately want to help people realize is even the experiences that we've had translate directly into those we've helped over the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
21 years of business. We haven't been here the whole time, the majority of the time, and we've seen the ups and downs, the ones that are successful and the ones that aren't. And boy, that's been eye-opening, is even for our own operation. I'm about to drop some knowledge. Perk your ears up, okay? When you have super successful customers and you have very unsuccessful customers, guess what? You have a process problem. If your process is sound, then all your clients should be successful.
The clients that fit
the
and
ICP,
do the correct right?
Yeah. So you target the right people, and all of them should see the same outcome. But
as long as they take the same steps.
Right. But even for us, sometimes we miss the mark.
Yep.
Which means, Caden, that we have some processes that need to be fixed, which is why
Absolutely.
you're even making this shift of my role is, if you truly believe that the process is a business's greatest asset, then why don't you put more resource and time
into the
and
process.
expertise into building the process and training? Like, once you build the process, you train, you coach, you make sure that it's running and working. And if it doesn't, then it's tweaked and changed. But the time given to that, it can't just be an afterthought. It can't be, well, if we have time, we'll update the process. No, the process is what's causing you to fail.
Yeah.
There's a mic drop for you. Right?
Yeah, well, it's the idea that you started as a commercial cleaning company. You started this vision in your own mind that you were going to go be an entrepreneur and work for yourself, do the things that allowed you to accomplish an end outcome in life, financial freedom, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Right. So whatever you do is driven by the fact that you are an owner of the company. You have the direct upside. You have that long-term vision. Employees don't, and you shouldn't expect them to have that level of dedication to your company.
They're not you.
So don't expect them to be able to do what you can do, which means that if you want to scale, how do you get every single one of your employees to be able to do what you do? Start becoming a teacher. You are the teacher. You are no longer the student. They're the student, and your full-time job in working on the business is to teach, mentor, and coach the vision into existence, because they can go execute and bring it to pass.
Boom.
There you go.
What an episode.
Well, that's a wrap. If you have thoughts or conversations or even questions, we've done a few different outlines of
styles
the podcast.
Of the show.
I'm actually really excited for one that's coming up that we've been preparing. We have literally 21 years of experiences and customer stories, prospecting stories. Like, we've heard almost everything under the sun. You know, I can't say everything because every once in a while you get something coming in. You're like, in the 21 years that we have been in business, I have never heard of that happening or whatever. So setting those aside, but we have a ton of these experiences, and I want to create a story to help illustrate things in our future episodes. I have some stories I'm putting together on these exact experiences, not just us offering advice and feedback. But there's some gnarly stories that we've been a part of over the years that we've heard. I'm going to write them in a way that illustrates the outcome without ever disclosing or giving a hint, because they are real stories into who the companies are. I would never do that. But there are some amazing lessons learned in the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
And I want to start bringing some of these stories in. So start thinking of some.
Okay. Jeez.
I know you had one yesterday.
I did, but...
Anyways, if you're loving what you are seeing in the podcast, make sure you subscribe so you know when new episodes are hitting. And then second off is you can email in vip@cadenhutchens.com to either explore a story on the show, or if you have something to share, or a topic or a question. We've pulled a lot of questions into our former episodes of questions that we've been asked. If you want to continue participating, go ahead and do that. So thanks for tuning in to the Manic.
Whoa, the Manic Operator.
The Magnetic Operator. And it was a fun one.
That was a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice job.